That's it. I'm taking this. Nothing transmits on my FOB during River City. Not for a memo, not for a contractor, not for anybody. Major Royce Hutchins held the black phone above the tray rail, like evidence at a trial, only he had been invited to judge. 11:40 in the morning. 200 soldiers in the dining facility of Forward Operating Base Crosswind, and every one of them suddenly interested in their eggs. The woman whose hand the phone had just left did not move. Civilian cargo pants the color of the dust outside. A fleece the color of the dust outside. Dark hair pulled back tight. An escort badge clipped at her collar that said nothing about who she was and everything about what the base assumed. Escort required. Her hand stayed half open in the air for 1 second, exactly where the phone had been. The way a hand stays open when its owner has decided not to close it into anything. Behind Hutchins stood 2 soldiers of the sweep team, wands and clipboards, riding the wake of a man who liked having a wake. 2 nights earlier, a signal had been triangulated, transmitting from inside the wire. The base had gone to River City. Total communications blackout. No personal devices. No exceptions. And the order was real. And the sweep was real. And the threat was real. Everything Hutchins did that morning stood on legitimate ground. It was everything he did afterward that did not. The woman reached into her chest pocket and laid a single laminated page on the rail between them. 1 page, a signature block, a time stamp 11 days old, a routing code of letters and numbers that began with a prefix most people on that base had never seen, and 3 people in the building could not have pronounced the meaning of. Exemption memorandum, she said. Signed. Current. The verification line is printed at the bottom. 4 minutes, and this is over. Hutchins read 2 lines of it and smiled. It was a good smile. It had gotten him through staff college, and 2 command climates, and 1 inspection failure that still itched under his collar like a wool blanket. I can print one of these in the ops center in 4 minutes, he said. Nice laminate. Forged or photocopied, ma'am. Either way, it's mine now. He turned the phone over in his hand. Matte black. Heavier than a phone should be. No carrier logo. He felt the weight and misread it completely. And this is the most interesting phone I've seen all week. You can collect it when your paperwork clears. If it clears. The hall had gone quiet in rings, the way water goes quiet around a dropped stone. At the coffee urn, 3 tables back, a first sergeant named Calvin Otero stood with a paper cup half raised and did not finish raising it. 50 years old, 23 of them in Army signal, from radio telephone operator in a swaying truck to the senior communications NCO on that base. He had heard 10,000 arguments about confiscated property. He was not listening to this one. He was watching the woman's hands. Log it, she said. Her voice did not rise and did not fall. It traveled flat, like traffic on a net. Asset tag, time of seizure, your name, and run the verification line on the memo. Today. The Army doesn't take tasking from contractors, sweetheart. Then take it from the memo. Hutchins laughed, 1 syllable, and handed the phone backward to his sweep team without looking at them. Bag it. Property cage. And somebody walk our guest to temporary billeting until CID has a feeling about her. He picked up the laminated page between 2 fingers, the way a man picks up something that might be sticky. We take security seriously here, ma'am. Whoever you actually work for can be proud. And there it was. The only movement she made that 200 people could have sworn to afterward, and none of them noticed. She turned her left wrist and read her watch. 1 second. Not the nervous glance of a traveler missing a connection. A reading. 11:42. She placed the time somewhere specific, somewhere structural, the way a mason places a stone, and then she surrendered the rail, the page, and the room. 200 people watched the major take a phone. 1 man watched the woman take the time. Otero set his cup down on the urn table, coffee untouched. He could not have said yet what was wrong with the picture, only that something was, and that it was wrong in a direction he had seen exactly twice in 23 years, and that both times the people in the picture had worn uniforms with nothing on them and left on aircraft nobody logged. A specialist materialized at the woman's elbow. Tessa Duval, 22, ops clerk, all elbows and procedure, holding a sign-out sheet like a shield. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." The woman went. No protest, no speech. Down the plywood corridor off the operations center, past the wall of safety posters, to a room with a desk, a cot, a folding chair, and a government wall clock running 3 minutes slow. She looked at the clock for a moment, with something that was not quite disapproval, more like a doctor noting a symptom, then looked at her own watch and sat down on the folding chair, back straight, hands folded. "Somebody will come get you, ma'am," Duval said, not sure if it was true. "I know," the woman said, sure that it was. Through the plywood wall came the sound of the DFAC finding its volume again, and somewhere in it, Hutchins's laugh. The woman did not react to the laugh. She turned her wrist. 11:53 exactly. She read the time the way other people read a countdown, and the day went on, and the base went back to its eggs. 0800 the next morning. River City held, and the base's long-haul communications were failing, genuinely failing, every 40 minutes, like a faucet that drips on a schedule. The operations center was loud with it. The link to the theater hub dropped at 0720, came back, dropped at 0800 sharp. A captain read failure times off a whiteboard. 2 soldiers swapped radio components with the particular violence of men troubleshooting the wrong thing. Through the middle of all of it came Duval, escorting the woman in the dust-colored fleece to her badge interview, hugging the wall the way you move a civilian through a working floor. The woman stopped. 3 steps inside the door. She tilted her head 1 degree, the way a person tilts into a sound, and listened to the rhythm of the failure being read aloud. Her eyes went once to the wall map, to the antenna farm symbol on the north berm, and held there. "Your retrans site is cycling on generator switchover," she said. 9 seconds of words into a room of strangers. "Check the transfer panel, not the radios. 40-minute interval. That's a fuel timer, not a fault." The floor turned and looked at her. The captain at the whiteboard looked at his failure times. 0640, 0720, 0800, and his mouth opened and made no further commitment. Hutchins came off the far desk like a man defending a fence line. "We've got soldiers for this, ma'am. Trained ones, the kind with clearances." The smile arrived on schedule, shaped like a door closing. "Specialist. Get the contractor to her interview. The floor is for people on the floor's roster." Duval moved her along. But Duval's eyes went from the wall map to the woman and back, and something in the specialist's 22-year-old filing system opened a new folder. 50 minutes later, the link held through the switchover for the first time in 2 days. A maintenance entry appeared in the log at 0910. Transfer panel relay, replaced. No name attached to the diagnosis. Hutchins read the entry, looked at it for 4 seconds, and attached no name to it either. Otero pulled the maintenance log an hour after that, because pulling logs was what he did when his stomach disagreed with the official version of a day. Transfer panel, exactly as the woman had said, in 9 seconds from the doorway, by ear. He walked to the badge office and asked, conversationally, for the escort paperwork on the civilian in temporary billeting. "Sorrel, Evelyn," the sheet said. "Sponsor. A routing code. The same code as the memo." He copied it into his green notebook with the slow care of a man copying a serial number off something expensive. Through the badge office window, he could see her at the interview table. Composed was the wrong word. Composed implies effort. She sat the way a closed safe sits. At 09:14, she read her watch. At 09:25, she read it again. 11 minutes. Otero noted the interval without knowing it was an interval, the way you note a single chess move without seeing the game. Inside, the badge clerk worked through his questionnaire, and the woman answered what could be answered. Then she leaned forward slightly and said the only thing she had come to say, in the tone of a person dictating for a record. That device answers a scheduled cryptographic check-in. If it misses 2, this base will get a phone call it does not want. Run the verification line. Please. The clerk's pen hovered. It was not a question on his sheet. And so, in the manner of clerks since the invention of paper, he wrote none of it down. From the doorway, where he had appeared with coffee and excellent timing, Hutchins initialed the bottom of the interview sheet and added one line in confident block letters. Subject repeats, cover story. They train them on consistency, he said to the clerk, kindly, loud enough. Say one thing, never vary. It's almost professional. The woman looked at him for a moment. There was nothing in the look that a camera would have caught. No contempt, no plea, no warning. It was the look of someone confirming a measurement she had already taken twice. Otero stood at the window after she had been walked out, her escort sheet still in his hand, and read the sponsor code one more time. Slowly. The way you reread a number you are beginning to suspect you have seen before, in a context with armed escorts and aircraft that did not appear on any schedule. Then he went back to his floor and said nothing, because 23 years had taught him exactly when nothing was the strongest thing a man could say. By the second evening, she had a nickname, because a forward operating base is a small town with antennas. The Pentagon Princess. It traveled from the ops floor to the motor pool to the chow line in under a day, picking up a smirk at every handoff. Soldiers grinned at her over trays. She nodded back, pleasant, level. And at 1200 exactly, mid-nod, she read her watch, and the grin nearest her faltered without knowing why. The cruelty stayed small. That was the style of the thing. Nothing you could photograph. The third morning, Hutchins came to temporary billeting personally, warm as a recruiting poster, and traded her escort badge for a new one. Restricted, it said. Dining facility. Billeting. Latrines. Nothing else on the base existed for her now, until your paperwork sorts itself out, he said, presenting it like a small gift. Shouldn't be more than a week. We take security seriously here. I'm sure whoever you work for would approve. You haven't opened the verification request, she said. Not an accusation. An inventory line. Everything moves through process, ma'am. He tapped the badge in her hand. Twice, a man knocking on his own door. Process is what keeps everybody safe. She clipped the badge to her collar, the lower hook this time, and thanked him, which unsettled him more than anything else she could have done with her face. Alone in the plywood room, she opened a green memo book, government issue, older than Duval, and wrote. Anyone glancing at the page would have seen handwriting like fence wire. Anyone reading closely would have seen structure. Date-time groups down the left margin. Names, quotes, in quotation marks, attributed. The asset tag of a phone, copied from memory, and the property cage custody line recorded the way no civilian on Earth records anything. Seal number, witness, time, the witness's duty position, the time again, initialed. Duval saw the page on the fourth water delivery. Not the words, the woman angled the book, polite as a poker player, just the bones of it. Columns. My drill sergeant wrote like that, Duval said. Columns. Good drill sergeant, the woman said. 4 syllables, the warmest thing anyone had heard her say all week. Duval floated out of the room with the empty case and could not have explained to anyone what she was smiling about. That night, day 3, 2200, the temperature dropped the way it does in that country, like a door opened on a vault. The woman stood outside temporary billeting in the cold, fleece zipped to the collar, and looked north. Not at the moon, which was worth looking at. Not at the gate, which is where civilians look, toward the way out. At the antenna farm on the north berm, the retrans masts, the satellite dishes, the dark geometry of everything a base says with its skyline. She stood facing it the way other people face a fireplace. Otero, crossing from the ops center with his collar up, saw her and stopped walking. A woman alone in the cold, communing with the antennas. He stood there a long moment, hands in his pockets, doing the kind of math that has the numbers in it. 3 days. A forged memo accusation no one had verified. A badge cut down by a man padding a record. A phone in a cage, answering to no one. If a base full of professionals writing her off makes your jaw tighten, the subscribe button is below, and the window is still closing. Day 4 began with paperwork, because that was the terrain Hutchins fought best on. He drafted the incident report himself, at his own desk, with the door open so the floor could see him being thorough. He was not a stupid man. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. And the report was not a stupid report. It assembled itself out of true facts, the way a wall assembles itself out of honest bricks. Subject arrived during a declared communications blackout. Subject carried a non-standard transmitting device of unusual construction. Subject presented documentation bearing an unverifiable routing code. Subject demonstrated, unprompted, detailed technical knowledge of base communications infrastructure. Subject repeats her cover story, under questioning with notable discipline. Conclusion. Probable foreign-directed collection activity. Recommendation. Continued hold-on movement. Referral to criminal investigation. Device retained in evidence. Every brick true. The wall a lie. He read it twice, changed 1 comma, and signed it. Name, rank, date, the full architecture of a signature block. Then routed it to the commander's Q-flagged routine, where it slid beneath a fuel contract dispute, 2 convoy schedules, and a generator that kept eating belts. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Granger's Q was where routine things went to age like timber. At 1100, the woman in temporary billeting submitted a request of her own. She wrote it by hand, 1 page, and gave it to Duval at the water delivery, because Duval was the only person on the base with both access to the ops counter and the habit of looking her in the eye. The page said almost nothing and said it perfectly. Request that base personnel execute the verification procedure printed on the exemption memorandum currently held in evidence. Citation, the memo's own paragraph and line. Then a signature, and under the signature, a date-time group rendered in the format the Army has used since before anyone on that base was born. Day, hour, Zulu suffix, month, year. Written by a hand that had clearly written 10,000 of them. Duval carried it to the ops counter like it was warm. Hutchins intercepted it there, because intercepting things at the ops counter was his native gift. He read as far as the 2nd line. Then he initialed the corner. Reflex, training, the bureaucrat's tick of marking everything he touched, and dropped the page into the burn bag beside the counter, where the day's dead classified paper went to be destroyed. The bag did not rustle. The floor did not pause. Duval stood there with her hand suddenly empty and her face working through something that had no regulation attached to it. She's persistent, Hutchins said, not unkindly, which made it worse. They train on that. You did right bringing it to me, specialist. Everything moves through me until CID says otherwise. We done? Yes, sir, Duval said, and a folder in her filing system grew a 2nd page. In the commander's office that afternoon, Granger surfaced from convoy schedules long enough to remember the loose thread. 46 years old, a decent officer with a tired man's economy. He asked questions in the fewest words that could carry them. The contractor thing. Handled? Handled, sir. Paperwork's moving. 2 sentences. The entire failure of a forward operating base, in miniature, between 2 men who each believed they were doing their jobs. Granger trusted his OPSEC officer because distrust costs hours, and he had none. And Hutchins fed that trust exactly the diet it preferred, the sound of motion. Granger went back to his fuel war. The thread went back to sleep, and in the confiscated property cage, on a steel shelf, in a plastic bin between a private's vape pen and a taped-up boombox, seized in 2024 and never claimed, the black phone lay with its screen dead dark, drawing 4 milliwatts in a sleep that was not sleep, counting. The wall clock above the cage read 2100. 19 hours, the arithmetic ran, until the first scheduled window opened. 19 hours until a machine in that bin asked a question into the dark and waited a polite, programmed interval for the only thumb on the base that could answer it. Hutchins worked late that night, putting the last page on his report, and signed it a second time where the routing demanded it. He dated both signatures. He squared the pages against the desk, twice, and smiled at the alignment. A careful man. In ink, twice, on top of the only paper trail that was going to matter. Major Royce Hutchins had built the case against the one person on forward operating base. Crosswind, it could not convict. Otero started with the property log, because signals men start with the record of the thing, not the thing. 0600 day 5, the cage office, cold enough inside to see his breath. He turned the log around on the counter and read the entry for the phone the way he read everything. Twice, once for the words, and once for the format. Asset tag, Kilo Whiskey, then 5 digits, then a letter suffix. He stopped there. He read it a third time. Kilo Whiskey. He had seen that prefix twice in 23 years. Once in 2009, on a pallet of comms gear that arrived with its own armed escort and left no paperwork behind. Once in 2019, stenciled on a case carried by a man with no name tape and a beard, moving through a base in another country with 4 others like him, while a full colonel held doors. National asset controlled cryptographic equipment. The kind of serial number that does not belong to a unit. The kind that belongs to a program. He copied the tag into his green notebook under the routing code from the badge office and looked at the 2 of them together for a while. At 0700, he used the morale line, the unclassified phone bank, the line for calling wives and mortgage companies, to call a man he had soldiered with for 2 decades, retired now, working as a civilian at Theater Signal Brigade, a man who owed him and knew it. Prefix Kilo Whiskey on a handheld, Otero said. No greeting. Greetings were for people with time. Who carries that? The pause on the line lasted 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds, Otero learned more than the answer would have told him. Walk away from whatever this is, First Sergeant. Dial tone. 6 words and a dial tone, from a man who had once talked for 3 hours about a fishing trip. Otero put the receiver down with the care you give a weapon you have just discovered is loaded, and went to find coffee, and thought. At 1000, he carried 2 cups to temporary billeting. He did not ask who she was. He had no need to know, and more than any man on that base, he believed in the load-bearing strength of that phrase. He set her cup on the plywood desk and stood, and she let the silence run exactly as long as it wanted to, which told him another thing, because civilians cannot do that. That handset, he said, finally. Statement, not question. Signals NCO to whatever she was. It calls home on a schedule. Twice a day. She turned her wrist, unhurried, and read her watch. He watched her do it, and understood at last what he had been watching for 5 days. Not nerves. Navigation. The woman did not check the time. She took fixes off it. "It's missed once," she said. Otero did the arithmetic of what twice would mean. He had built escalation procedures himself, smaller ones, the kind that woke battalion staff duty officers, and scaled this one to a kilo whiskey serial number, and the answer ran up through his chest like cold water up a pipe. His coffee went cold in his hand. He never noticed. "Verification line on the memo," he said. 4-minute phone call. "You see it, too. Even, almost gentle. You're the first." He went up the chain that afternoon, because that is what the chain is for, and a first sergeant who skips it has stopped believing in the only religion the Army has. He stood in front of Hutchins's desk and chose every word with both hands. "Maybe verify the memo, sir. Costs nothing. If it's false, the report's stronger. If it's true, sir. If it's true, we'd want to know early." Hutchins leaned back, generous, untouchable, a man at the exact altitude of his ceiling. "First Sergeant, I admire the diligence, honestly. Write it down, route it through me, and let officers worry about the spy phone." A smile, the door-shaped one. "We done?" "Yes, sir," Otero said, and walked out, and stood in the gravel outside the ops center for a moment, looking north at the antenna farm the way she did. A 5-letter prefix, a dead dial tone, a phone that calls home twice a day and has already missed once. If you need to know what answers when it misses twice, subscribe, because the second window opens at 2200 tomorrow, and nothing on this base will be the same after it closes. Night 5, 2300. The plywood room. The wall clock ticking its 3-minute lie. The cot springs printed their geography on her back, and Evelyn Sorrell lay awake in it, eyes open in the dark. And for the only time in this story, the inside of her head is the room we are standing in. She was not thinking about Hutchins. Hutchins was arithmetic, and the arithmetic was already running. She was thinking, the way she always thought when a window hung open and her hands were empty, about a ridgeline in Kunar Province, 12 years gone. 2014. She was 36, a senior captain with a signal detachment and a retransmission site at altitude. A generator, 2 masts, a box of frequencies bridging a valley 14,000 feet of rock wanted closed. Below, a Chinook was down. Not shot down, the after-action would insist. Mechanical, as if the mountain cared. A recovery element was moving on foot through terrain that swallowed radio like the sea swallows light, and the only voice path between them and everything that could save them ran through her ridge. She held that window open 31 hours. She did not sleep. The cold came through her jacket, and she fed the generator and walked the masts and held it open, and the voices crossed her bridge all night like traffic on the only road out. One of the voices belonged to Captain Rory Vandiver, 31 years old, easy on the net the way some men are easy on a horse. Stand by for routing, relay. Vandiver, unbothered, taking his turn. She knew him by voice only, never met him, never shook his hand. On a net, after enough hours, voice is the whole man. At 0311, the generator hit a switch over its manual called automatic, a fuel timer, a transfer panel, an 11-minute gap nobody had written a procedure for, because no procedure writer had ever stood on that ridge at 03 in the morning with the temperature at 9 degrees and a valley full of traffic, 11 minutes of dead air. She got it back at 0322 with her hands full of frozen cable, and the net came up, and the traffic resumed, and one voice did not. Vandiver had called for extract routing in minute 4. The call went into static. He moved on his own judgment, because brave men with no information still move, and the route he chose was the one the routing call would have closed. The investigation found what investigations find. No procedural fault. Equipment within specification. No negligence assignable. The phrase within specification ate at her for a year because it was true. Everything had worked as designed. The design was the killer. So she rewrote the design. The protocol she drafted that winter was 4 pages. Scheduled cryptographic check-ins for every national asset terminal in the field. 2 consecutive misses, and the device hard locks. Dead to any thief, any captor, any clever major. And the miss escalates automatically, machine to machine, up to the one watch floor with the authority to come looking. No discretion. No judgment calls at 03 in the morning. The system asks, somebody answers. Or the system comes to find out why. They called it the Sorrel Protocol for about a year, until she made them take her name off it. 11 minutes. She had been early to every window since, the way other people breathe. In the cage, at 0200, the black phone screen lit once in the dark between the vape pen and the boombox. A single line of text no one saw. The first grace period expiring. And then went dark in a way it could not come back from without her thumb and 16 digits spoken in the right order. Not a trap. She had set no trap. It was just physics now. Design. Doing at last what design is for. On the cot, eyes open, Evelyn Sorrell said one word aloud. To no one, in a voice flat as deck plating. Verify. 7,000 miles away, under a vast 5-sided roof, on a watch floor that never closes, a status board flipped one line from green to amber, and a young officer who had never heard of FOB crosswind picked up a phone. Day 6, 1700. She came to the ops counter one last time, and this time she came formally, the way artillery comes formally. She had requested to see the commander in writing that morning, through Duval, logged this time, witnessed, and the request had returned with a single line in confident block letters. Commander's time is tasked. Submit through OPSEC. So at 1700 she stood at the counter where the watch section changed over, 8 soldiers in earshot, and she submitted through OPSEC, out loud, from memory. Exemption memorandum, evidence locker, item Kilo Whiskey, 419er, 9er7 Alpha. Her voice did not rise. It carried the way a net call carries, syllable by syllable, built to survive distortion. Verification procedure, paragraph 4, line 2. The line reads, holder verification available at all hours via the number printed below. I am requesting, for the record, in the presence of the watch section, that any soldier on this base dial that number. The call takes 4 minutes. I will wait. The room went still on its own. Soldiers can smell precision the way farmers smell weather. The sergeant of the guard looked at the lieutenant. The lieutenant looked at the counter. Somewhere, a radio hissed and recovered. Hutchins arrived mid-sentence because rooms like that pulled him the way altitude pulls weather, and he heard the back half of it, and he laughed. On the record, this time. In front of the watch section, with the changeover log open on the counter. Outstanding, he said. The forged memo has a customer service line. He turned to take the room with him, an instructor's pivot, and found the room declining to be taken. A staff sergeant studied his boots. The lieutenant got as far as, "Sir, maybe we could," and was driven over like a traffic cone. Specialist Duval, logged that the subject declined to cooperate with verification of her own documents and is now staging performances at my counter. CID can enjoy the audacity Thursday. Declined to cooperate. The words went into the log because Duval was 22 and a specialist, and the order was direct, and she typed them with her jaw set so hard her ears moved. The sentence was false. Everyone in earshot knew the sentence was false. It entered the record anyway, at 1711, initialed. R.H. That night, on her own time, in her own bunk, Tessa Duval did a thing no one had ordered. She photographed her private duty notes. 6 days of them. Every water delivery, every denied request, every quote. Time-stamped in the columns the woman's notebook had taught her to keep. 41 entries. She did not know yet what the photographs were for. She knew, with the clean certainty available only at the rank of specialist, that they were for something. 2200. The second window opened. In the cage, nothing moved. That was the whole event. Nothing. On a steel shelf. In the dark. The duty soldier walked his hourly lap, hummed something, rattled the lock out of habit. The bin did not glow. The phone did not ring, because that phone never rang. 2230 came, and the window, that no one with a key had gone near, closed as quietly as it had opened. And somewhere inside the matte black case, a state change that no power on that base could now reverse. Outside temporary billeting, under a sky with the cold coming down out of it like a dropped blade, Evelyn Sorrell stood with her breath showing and read her watch. 22:31. And she smiled. 6 days of being called princess and contractor and subject. 6 days of laminate held up between 2 fingers. 6 days of a man initialing her into smaller and smaller rooms. None of it had moved her face 1 millimeter. The smile, when it finally came, was small and without malice, and absolutely without doubt, and any soldier who has ever watched a range go hot would have recognized it. Not triumph. Certainty. The difference between a gambler's grin and an engineer's. At 2231, Major Royce Hutchins owned every decision on forward operating base Crosswind. At 2232, that stopped being true. The machine Evelyn Sorrell had built 12 years ago, out of 11 minutes, and a dead man's voice, began to move, and it did not require her permission, and it did not require his. 0140, day 7. The machine moved the way she had designed it to move, without drama, without discretion, step by step, up a ladder of wakefulness. Authentication failure, second consecutive, confirmed. Asset flagged, last filed itinerary pulled. A transit manifest 11 days old. A routing through a logistics hub, a final line reading crosswind/transit. A watch officer under the 5-sided roof cross-checked the personnel recovery cell's active operations against the asset's tasking, read what the asset was holding open, and stopped being a young officer with a checklist and became a man moving quickly. At 0158, the secure line in the commander's plywood office at FOB Crosswind began its low, patient purr. It purred for 40 seconds before a runner reached the commander's billet, and Victor Granger crossed his own base at a dead run in unlaced boots, because lieutenant colonels do not get gentle calls at 0200. He took it standing, one hand flat on the desk. "Sir, this is the National Military Command Center." The voice was young and was reading, and the reading made it worse, because it meant a script, and scripts meant the thing had already left the realm of conversation. Authentication query. Priority. Is Colonel Evelyn Sorrell currently on your installation? Granger's mind performed the only honest act available to it. I don't have a Colonel Sorrell. A pause, the length of a sheet of paper turning over. Then a different voice, female, flat as deck plating. The voice of a person for whom 0200 was a working hour and had been for 30 years. Lieutenant Colonel Granger, Brigadier General Coyle, Joint Staff, J3. Each element set down like a tool on a bench. Check your detainee log, your billeting log, and your confiscated property log. In that order. We'll hold. The Army teaches many things, and the thing it teaches deepest has no field manual. The sound of the moment a situation becomes a career. Granger put the handset down on the desk blotter with the line open. One does not put a brigadier general on hold. One lays her gently on a flat surface and pulled the logs himself by hand, because at 02 in the morning, trust is a luxury, and he had just discovered he could not afford it. Billeting. Temporary/hold. SACIV. 6 days. Property. Item Kilo Whiskey, 419er, 7 Alpha, 1 each. Phone, black. Detainee annex, his own OPSEC officer's confident block letters. Sorrel, Evelyn. Subject repeats. Cover story. He picked the handset back up. General, I believe. And the Army's deepest training held, and he said it straight. I believe my installation has had Colonel Sorrel in a holding room for 6 days. Her equipment is in my evidence cage. The pause this time had texture. Coyle's voice, when it returned, had not risen at all, which was the worst available outcome. Colonel Granger. The promotion of address was surgical. Everyone on the line knew his actual rank, and the word Colonel arrived like a loan being called. 12 minutes ago, I briefed the Director of Operations on why a national personnel recovery window collapsed tonight. 3 people are sitting in a riverbed because a device went dark on your base. You will go to her, you will restore her equipment with a witness of custody authority, and you will give her this watch floor. We hold until she answers. Yes, ma'am. And Granger. A beat. She will not raise her voice at you. Try to be worth that. The walk from the commander's office to the holding room ran 90 meters of plywood corridor, and Victor Granger walked it, carrying the property log under his arm like a man carrying his own appeal paperwork. Behind him, summoned by runner and dressed in 6 minutes, came Major Royce Hutchins, still assembling explanations. The memo had anomalies, sir. The routing code didn't parse. Process was followed. Each one dying somewhere behind his teeth as the corridor got longer. The corridor was empty. The base was asleep. No formation. No audience. History does not call witnesses for its best work. Granger knocked. 2 knuckles. Twice. She was awake. Of course she was awake. She sat at the plywood desk, squared away, fleece zipped, hair tight, hands folded, as if 0215 were an appointment she had made 6 days ago. And, in every way that mattered, it was. Ma'am. His voice found its footing on the second word. Colonel Sorrel? You'll want to bring me the phone, Colonel. No triumph in it. Tasking, clean and flat. And a witness with custody authority. It was the doorway that did the work that a parade ground does in other stories. Granger stepped aside for the cage NCO he'd had sense enough to bring, and that put Hutchins in the doorframe with nowhere to stand and nothing to hold. And the audience, 2 men and a specialist runner, watched his face perform the entire journey his career had just taken. Confusion first. Genuine confusion. Because the woman at the desk was still wearing the dust-colored fleece and the restricted badge he had personally downgraded. Then disbelief as the cage NCO unbagged the phone, and Granger, a lieutenant colonel, held the evidence log flat for her signature, like a staff sergeant holding a clipboard. Then recognition, arriving in pieces and then all at once. The routing code that didn't parse, because he lacked the clearance to parse it. The verification line he had fed to a burn bag. The 4-minute phone call he had been begged, in writing, 5 separate times, to make. And then the last station, the one the face reaches when the arithmetic completes. Horror. Not at her. At the ink. At his own name, signed twice, dated twice, initialed in the corner of a request he had destroyed, at 6 days of meticulous, confident, self-authored evidence that the only verified document on forward operating base Crosswind was the one he had called forged. Sorrel pressed her thumb to the black glass and spoke 16 digits into it, unhurried, in groups of 4. The phone lit green, considered her, and came alive in her hand. And the first traffic through was the thing she'd already knew, and the 2 officers did not. Abort confirmed, 2351. Window reset, 72 hours. Element holding. 3 men in a dry riverbed, 400 meters from a border, who had watched their extraction dissolve at the turn of a fuel timer's worth of vanity, now holding 72 more hours of dark and dust because a major had wanted a win for his statistics. She read it without expression and turned her wrist. Old habit. Fix taken. Logged. And looked up at Granger. "Nobody died tonight, Colonel. That's the only good news in this room." She crossed the operations floor at 0230 with the handset alive in her hand and the watch floor of the National Military Command Center in her ear, and the half-dozen soldiers on shift watched her pass with the particular silence of people recalculating a week of their own jokes. At the senior desk, First Sergeant Calvin Otero, on duty because he had traded for the night shift on a hunch he could not have written down, looked up and saw the picture he had been assembling for 6 days. Finished. He did not call the floor to attention. Wrong hour. Wrong woman for it. And he knew it somehow. Knew the formation, the announcement, the theatrical salute would have landed on her like noise. He stood up from his chair. That was all. One chair scraping back, one man standing, 23 years of knowing exactly what he was looking at, on his feet beside his desk, with his hands at his sides. She caught it, nodded once, the nod one professional gives another across a net that has just come back up, and kept walking. It landed harder than a formation. The floor saw it. Every soldier on shift would tell the story wrong within a week, and the standing up part right forever. Behind them all, in the corridor outside the operations center, Major Royce Hutchins stood alone with a burn bag in his memory, and the cold coming up through the plywood, understanding everything in the one currency he had always respected: documentation. There was no arrest. Watch the ending carefully. It ages better than handcuffs. 0700, day 7. Granger's office, gray light, 3 paper trails laid side by side on the desk, like exhibits in a museum of a man's character. The incident report, flagged routine, signed twice. The photograph Specialist Duvall had surrendered at 0530, standing at attention, voice steady. 41 entries, 6 days. Every denied request time-stamped. And the property cage ledger, which had given up its longer story under Otero's flashlight before dawn. 4 months of confiscations logged into evidence and never processed out. A staff sergeant's tablet, 2 soldiers' personal phones, held 9 weeks without disposition, a chaplain's assistant's e-reader, each seizure inflating the OPSEC section's monthly statistics, each one a small theft of someone standing dressed as vigilance. Granger did not shout. Tired, decent men conducting an accounting of their own household do not shout. "You had the verification line for 6 days, Royce. It was a 4-minute phone call." The silence went on for 9 seconds, and inside it, a careful man deflated by careful degrees. "Sir." Sorrell, present at Granger's request, asked for nothing. That unsettled the room more than a demand would have. When Granger finally asked her, directly, what she wanted done, she took a sheet of paper and wrote 1 paragraph, longhand, in fence wire columns, and slid it across. Major Hutchins, reassigned from OPSEC duties, effective immediately. Designated implementation officer, theater scheduled authentication protocol, all national asset terminals, all transiting installations. Quarterly compliance reports. First report due in 90 days. Under it, a signature block with a date-time group and the signature. He would spend the next year of his life enforcing, installation by installation, under her signature, the procedure he had fed to a burn bag. Every quarterly report would cross her desk. Every base in the theater would learn the protocol from the man who had broken it. No cell, no tribunal, no headline. He would simply work for her now, in the only way that mattered, for as long as the assignment said. She looked at him once as Granger countersigned, the first time she had looked at him since the doorway, and gave him the single sentence she had been holding for 6 days, even, unhurried, without heat. Checking the device was the only thing you did right, Major. Everything after it was vanity. Go be useful instead. He held her eyes for 1 second, 2, and then his went down to the paragraph that now owned his next year. The watch section outside the door would dispute for months what his face had done. The honest witnesses said it looked like arithmetic. Duvall was reassigned by lunch. The base's new 2-person authentication cell, stood up by Granger's order, designed in 9 minutes at a plywood desk, needed a junior soldier whose records showed she kept columns, and the first name on the duty roster Sorrell drafted was the specialist's. Her 41 photographed entries went into the file as an enclosure, with a cover memo in Sorrell's hand. Attached. What right looks like at the rank of specialist. No handcuffs, no tribunal. Just a man required to spend a year becoming the procedure he laughed at, and a base that learned what the quiet ones carry. If that ending sits right with you, steadier than a cell door, subscribe to Honor Tales, because this is what the channel is for. 71 hours after the second window died, at 2200 exactly, the reset window opened, and this time, the base was built around it. Sorrell sat at a borrowed terminal on the operations floor. The black phone cradled in a charging dock Otero had machined out of a radio bracket, traffic moving under her hands in clean bursts. 3 call signs crossed a river line on schedule, in the dark, 400 meters becoming 4,000, becoming a grid square with a helicopter in it. The floor worked around her in low voices. At 22:41, she said, to no one in particular, "Elements across." And the watch section let out a breath it had been holding for 3 days on behalf of men it had never met. In the doorway of the operations center stood Major Royce Hutchins, present for no reason the duty log would ever record, watching the work. Watching what the phone actually was. Not contraband, not a win, not a statistic. A window, held open by a woman who had been paying for one 11-minute lapse since before half the floor had enlisted. Nobody invited him in. Nobody sent him away. He stood at the exact threshold his judgment had earned him, and watched the river crossing he had nearly priced in blood, and learned more about operational security in 40 minutes than in the 4 months he had spent weaponizing it. The lift came at 0540, with the sky going from black to flat gray, and the antenna farm standing against it like a tree line. She carried 1 bag. At the edge of the LZ, waiting with the rotor wash already combing the gravel, stood Specialist Tessa Duvall, holding her sign-out sheet and pretending that was the reason she was there. Sorrell stopped. From the side pocket of the bag, she took a book, pocket-sized, swollen with use, its cover gone soft as cloth. A signals field reference, 20 years old, annotated in fence wire columns on every margin of every page. She held it out. "Columns," she said. 1 word. Duvall took the book with both hands, the way the cage NCO had handled the kilo whiskey bin, and stood with it against her chest, and could not produce a single syllable of military courtesy, and was not required to. The helicopter lifted into the gray. No memorial wall waited in this story. No message arrived from the dead. The dead had gotten their message 12 years early, and she had been answering it twice a day ever since. Below her, the FOB shrank to geometry. The berm, the masts, the plywood grid of a small town with antennas that would wake up in an hour and find her gone, which was how she had always preferred to leave. Airborne, with the river line somewhere off the right side, and 3 recovered men asleep behind a border that had stopped mattering, Colonel Evelyn Sorrell turned her wrist and read her watch once. On time. She closed her eyes. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.